Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and program stream at windowsontheworld.net.
Welcome to Windows on the World, and what an exciting show we've got for you tonight. Well, all of these shows seem to be quite exciting these days, and what we seem to find is that the narrative is actually all linked up into what we now call the bigger picture, and the agenda which we cover week in, week out, carries on every day in the media, and to help it along we get the use of and the manipulation of what is known as terrorism. Now, this does not now have to be even clearly defined as terrorism, as we have been recently finding out over the past couple of years, but every now and again there's a big event which pushes on the agenda. Now, whether these things are false flags, whether these things are hoaxes and all the rest of it, we're not even going to go into that because the agenda remains the same. So the terrorism events run alongside the agenda. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Because everything seems to be in place before the attacks happen. Now, we're going to talk about this recent terrorist attack in New Zealand, but basically we're going to go into a bigger picture as we always do. Now, this does not now have to be clearly defined. This is the whole point. We're in a post-truth world and we report on this stuff every week. What comes out of the press has to be critically analysed because there is nothing of any critical analysis going in. So what we have to do is try and decode what's coming out. So basically just the current tags which have moved from Islamic extremism to white supremacism give the game away, because we all know this came out of MI5 and the security services. And we're going to get into that a bit tonight. It's a really interesting thing and give some good examples of what is in the press, what the security services say, and what is actually behind it, and what evidence they've actually got. So we're going to get into all that. Now, the thing is, as we've said, so the current thing has moved from Islamic extremism to white supremacism with no actual evidence cited. That's the main thing. Just vague connections being made, and this week's attack on mosques in New Zealand bears all the hallmarks and clumsiness of MI5 and security services narratives. In other words, the rise of the far right has been tagged onto this event. Now, practically every week we have mentioned the propaganda being spouted by MI5 and its related minions in the media, along with the think tanks and subversive media and psychological warfare promotion teams, is very prevalent, to say the least. Now, leaving out the details of this latest attack for now and looking at the outcome, it is already clear that this, like all recent terror attacks, is about arriving at an outcome. And that outcome is the ongoing war on the thinking population of the planet. It is actually that simple, because I think we've arrived at the point now where this agenda is, as I said earlier, so intertwined with these terrorist attacks that they seem to have a symbiotic relationship, don't they? I'm trying to actually make this sound new and interesting, but because we've been covering it so long, I suppose you could say we're going over old ground, but not as much as the mainstream media, hopefully. So in the wake of the mosque shootings, now the New Zealand Attorney General announces the government will ban semi-automatic weapons. Does this all start to sound quite familiar? It should be doing by now if you've been listening to what's been said after these attacks over the past few years. Let's carry on. In the UK, the parasitic repetition and globalist non-information rag, yes, The Guardian, that bastion of propaganda, ridiculousness and absolute flat-out lies, states The rise in the UK use of far-right online forums as anti-Muslim hate increases. Get this, yeah. Rise in UK use of far-right online forums as Muslim hate increases. Now, as usual, there's going to be no proof of this, but let's get into it. This is not, of course, backed up by any facts. This is the main thing. There's no facts actually put out in this whole propaganda narrative, just statements made which are then debunked as projections made by the brainwashed writers of the disinformation piece itself. So the idiot who wrote this, or the idiots, because often there's about 3 idiots who write these things in papers now, if you notice. So they have like 3 people who write these articles, which could be turned out in 10 minutes by anyone with a brain cell, which actually exposes another aspect of what's going on in the media. In other words, not only are there no journalists, but there aren't enough people to actually be able to string a coherent sentence together without the help of a few others to advise them or pool their resources. Now, this of course all ties in with the latest terror event in New Zealand as if it had been part of the plan itself. Now, that's the overall agenda that we're going to be talking about tonight, and I think I've made a good start on to open the show with. But the article, this article in The Guardian about the rise of the far right, it totally discredits itself by citing, yes, hope not hate, as a source of their unproven propaganda that Britain is using far right forums. This is what they're saying. Now, wait a minute. They've gone on to a couple of websites and they're assuming that thousands and hundreds of thousands of people are using these. Now, get this. Just get this. They then cite Stormfront, which could not possibly account for any significant rise in this. Now, the thing is that Stormfront is one website, okay? So what they do is they'll create whole papers and things like the Fringe Insurgency, a paper which was written by these 2 subversives who are trying to claim that there's a massive rise in the far right, which of course there isn't, only according to MI5, which actually haven't proven it. And they themselves say that the threat of Islamist extremism, according to them, not me by the way, is far greater than the threat of the far right. But then they're coming out on the other hand and saying there's a growing threat from the far right. These people are pathetic. These civil servants should be actually taken out and be made to do decent jobs. Maybe they should be given courses in bricklaying or something like that, something that's actually useful, you know, because the so-called intelligence services are now a laughing stock. MI5 is a joke. But the liars at Hope Not Hate are constantly used as a source of intelligence by the likes of The Guardian. Hope Not Hate are an arm of MI5, along with Tell Mama and all these other disgusting organisations which purport to be reporting on the rise of extremism and helping minorities, of course, basically creating minorities that weren't there in the first place. Now, get this. Useful idiot Sarah Khan is the UK's lead anti-extremism commissioner and is about to drop her bombshell report with her assumptions. Get this. She points to a fresh surge of far-right activists. Again, she's got no proof of this. She's another absolute idiot that's being used because she's probably got a big ego. Maybe I'm generalizing here, but these people are so ridiculous and despicable. Now, what this propaganda ministry muppet does not make clear is that she's talking about legal content. Now, this is legal content being displayed on public websites. In other words, nobody's saying anything illegal here. Now, it's of course, in the main, it's just opinion, and it's not extremist in any way. So loads of people have opinions on these forums, and what they're trying to do is to say that these are in some way extremist views. Well, what's an extremist view? Supporting Brexit is an extremist view. Denying anthropological global warming is happening is an extremist view, and also having anything to say about any mainstream narrative which is contrary to that narrative is an extremist view. So this useful idiot muppet Sarah Khan is basically reinforcing this. Now, there is no rise of the far right, and the only reason for it being contrived is the destruction of sovereignty and mob rule by the UN Global Action Plan. Oh, is that a conspiracy theory? No, it's a 40-chapter document that you can read online. But try telling that to your useful idiot change agents in your local council. Can you see what I'm getting at here? So this idiotic piece in The Guardian, which is the most idiotic and pathetic of newspapers, probably only really read in London, to be fair, by latte swilling, uninformed, what do you call them? Are they hipsters? Well, I mean, people who read The Guardian now, I have difficulty in defining, because they're not even people, or they're not even part of a group, are they? They're meant to be part of a group, but yeah, what could you say? They're the metropolitan elite. Is that what they are? So this idiotic piece then sums up the pathetic nature of its own propaganda and assumptions by stating, now get this, at the end of this propaganda piece about the rise of the far right, they say, however, MI5 said the number of right-wing cases was absolutely dwarfed by the number of Islamist cases. So in other words, Islamic terrorism is still number one, but coming in at number two this week, we've got the rise of the far right. And that's been the same for the past 2 years. So the rise of the far right isn't really taking off, is it? According to MI5. So the chief propagandist at Hope Not Hate. Now, get this. Hope Not Hate are this charity and limited company who basically go around defaming people they don't like. We've done loads of shows on Hope Not Hate. Please look at those. But the chief propagandist and useful idiot muppet of Hope Not Hate, Joe Mulhall, said the global audience for chat rooms and messaging sites that effectively and quickly spread hate ran into the hundreds of thousands. We know this because the website forums have hundreds of thousands on them. So in other words, he's saying that because websites that he doesn't like or they define as hate have possibly hundreds of thousands of people, which I don't believe anyway, maybe thousands, that they can say that this is all hate that adds to their narrative, which they get paid for, these useful idiot sponging parasite traitors like Joe Mulhall, who are actually working for a subversive agenda, whether he knows it or not. Maybe he's just an idiot, but he is a useful idiot along with all the rest of them. So he quickly assumes everyone who has a different opinion than his blinkered and artificially indoctrinated belief system is far right and spreading hate speech. Well, interestingly enough, Hope Not Hate are supported and have interconnections with terrorist organisations such as Antifa, and they send these terrorist organisations of useful idiots to terrorise members of the public, which makes Hope Not Hate basically facilitators of domestic terrorism. Okay, so they're going to turn round and say that's libelous. No, it's not, because we've got absolute proof in our own videos of old age pensioners being attacked by Antifa through Hope Not Hate. Hope Not Hate incited hatred against people in this country who are having legal meetings and not saying anything unlawful, and basically they're getting their black-clad thugs to attack them. So Hope Not Hate, terrorist organisation. Okay, I'll say that's in my opinion for now. But it's hard to tell if this muppet Joe Mulhall actually believes what he's putting out, or whether it just suits his warped and hate-fueled agenda on behalf of the third-party lobbyists and subversives ruining the world which he slavishly supports, because his privileged position requires maintenance. Maintenance being, of course, a wage packet for being a parasite. But the subversive liars behind organisations like Hope Not Hate, which actually indirectly incite violence and racial intolerance through their partners Antifa and these Soros-funded maniacs, are fueling terror attacks on moderate and balanced thinking. That's the important thing. This is, of course, the plan behind using the likes of Mulhall in the war against rational thought and indeed philosophical debate, because these people know nothing of philosophical debate. All is they know are sound bites and rhetoric. Now, in New Zealand, the website, this is just after this attack, this latest attack on a mosque in New Zealand by this guy called Brendan Tarrant, who was pulled from his car. See it all over the internet. We're not going to get into the detail of that. But in New Zealand, a website, kiwifarms.net, reported that it has been informed by a New Zealand police officer, John Michael, that all posts relating to this terror attack and IP addresses would be kept by the police. The police officer states, "We would like to preserve any posts and technical data, including IP addresses, email addresses, etc., linked to these posts, pending a formal legal request." Now, good on the guy who actually runs Kiwi Farms. He said, this is from Kiwi Farms owner Joshua Moon. He asked, "Is this a joke? I'm not turning over information on my users. The person responsible for posting the video and manifesto PDF is myself. Tell your superiors they're going to make the entire county, or countries rather, look like clowns trying to censor the internet." And it carries on. But that's a very good point, because what we have to do is stand up to this. Now, if you've got the police getting in touch with you, making veiled threats, we'll say, okay, which of the posts are libelous, which of them are inflammatory, get back to me and we'll remove them and take it from there. But this is incredible. This is what the likes of Hope Not Hate and the fear merchants in so-called intelligence will be collecting as proof of the rise of the yawn for the past 2 years far right. How many of these useful idiots does it take to shut down free association and insightful thought? Well, it actually doesn't take that many, but there are millions of them, these people. Well, it is not even a question, as there are so many on the public service gravy train that the truth is a minority, a victim, and one that is the target of assassination. The truth is assassinated. So one upstanding domestic terrorist stated, right now, Kiwi Farms is one of the most cohesive platforms having a serious discussion surrounding the New Zealand terror attack. Well, you can't have anyone having a serious discussion about something which is surrounded by so much pathetic waffle and propaganda, can you? So just the sort of quote needed by the terror czar and Joe Mulhall here to start a hate campaign against the white forum members exchanging their opinions lawfully and in public, something which is against the interests of the new form of not terrorism but errorism. So let's get on to this now, right? Because this is an important point. Terrorism after 7/7 in the UK has been a low-budget affair using patsies or what appear to be compromised by MI5, brainless or brainwashed individuals to carry out what are not in the main terrorist attacks. That's really important. So this latest one, you could say, is a terrorist attack in New Zealand, but what we've had recently in the past few years are not terrorist attacks, more like car accidents, following the new trend from a few years back. Now this is what I was calling terror on the cheap, not terror, because car crashes aren't really terrorism, are they? Now, the only thing far right I could see about the New Zealand shooter was that his body was not attached to his head. Now, this is really funny, right? If you look at the picture, that's taken in the car, his head is actually far right of his body. Check that out. Maybe that's where they get the far right thing from. Just check that picture out, because it's a head that's just been stuck onto a body. Now, a very good blogger and contributor to the show sometimes, Barbara Mackenzie, is from New Zealand, and she reports that New Zealand authorities appear to have blocked access to Zero Hedge. Now, Zero Hedge is a really good source of information and a quick moving source of information, a very useful source of information, and one that we look at regularly. So that seems to have been blocked in New Zealand, according to Barbara. Now, S. Patrick Barron on Twitter, this is someone's New Zealander on Twitter, he stated, Tarrant has won. Tarrant has won. The New Zealand government is going full 1984 on the Kiwis, just as he planned. Now, I would say just as planned, as New Zealand is Crown territory, and what happens there will happen in the UK, just as Australia has been turned from an easygoing and sometimes outspoken continent to a Stasi hijacked police state with an army of PCN forces in every part of public office. That's exactly what's happened to Australia. New Zealand again being Crown territory, and I don't want to upset people down under, because I know that they don't want it to be Crown territory, but there is a claim on it, and we suffer in the UK from exactly what you're suffering from there, if that's any consolation. But recently, now, banning David Icke from Australia, I mean, that was absolutely ridiculous, and New Zealand is now well and truly hijacked on the back of the rise of the non-existent fake far right, as planned and executed from Crown HQ, the UK. I hope that brings that back to reality. Now, back to the destruction of critical thought, and meanwhile in Crown HQ, which is the UK, a 3-year-old was spotted in Plymouth holding a sign which said, "Sorry, I'm not in school. I'm busy saving the planet." Now, how early does narcissistic personality disorder start to manifest itself? Because if this child is not actually a narcissist, he's actually holding a sign and working on the back of his narcissist parents, who will turn him into another narcissist, wanting to save the world, but doing it in the manner of showing off, which is the whole purpose of this new form of fake activism. Now, there's a whole new army of useful idiots being trained by lobbyists for global dominance. No, it's not a conspiracy theory. Look at your local council. The entitled fake corporate-backed activists at Extinction Rebellion, get this, are now fighting sanity using children to subvert what is left of objectivity. That's why I came in with that from a different angle, because we've been talking about these pathetic scroungers and entitled narcissists, Extinction Rebellion, for quite some time. And their publicity stunts are getting more and more pathetic, from throwing dye onto the street and saying it's blood, it's our blood, to actually saying we're actually all going to commit mass suicide because of what's happening. I mean, why don't they just glue themselves to doors? Oh, they do that already. Why don't they just lie in the road? Why don't they do all these things that they do? Because it's got nothing to do with activism. That's why they're doing it. Now, we've covered this cult in great depth, which is very difficult to do, as it actually has no depth whatsoever. It's ridiculously shallow. But the use of children as subversive spies, going on strike from school and berating their parents for breathing, is pure KGB-style subversion, and the useful idiot army of non-thinkers are controlling the youth for a great future. Yeah? No rights, no free movement, no money, no hope, and a death cult which aims to be the most successful depopulation plan ever. That's the whole point behind Extinction Rebellion. It is actually the culmination of all of the controlled opposition fake protest groups. It's a cartoon of the whole lot of them, run by cartoon people, entitled, scrounging, middle-class fake activists. And you can read all about that, roll up, on windowsontheworld.net. Just look at our Extinction Rebellion report, which is their report. It's all from their own sources. So, an update to the New Zealand mosque attack, let's get back to this, happened shortly after the main event. Get this, when a 23-year-old rammed his car into the gates of an Australian mosque while hurling abuse at worshippers, or so the Sun newspaper says. Well, of course, the Sun has very insightful and well-researched stories, doesn't it? But it says the driver was arrested after he allegedly slammed into the Bayful Masur Mosque in Queensland at around 7 p.m. on Saturday. He shouted offensive words before driving home. Now, what it turns out as, he'd already been stopped and tested and was on drugs. This is the bit that they don't tell you till the end, you see. It's like all of these fake stories, or stories with fakery in them. He says he was tested and was on drugs, then released. And one possible scenario is that he was just stoned and wondered who had left a mosque in the middle of the road. That's much more likely than the assumption made by the Sun there. So reading between the lines is not difficult, but it's an add-on story to the main event which has just appeared. Now, in our bid to uncover and expose the infiltration of just about everything, a request from Liz came into us. It came into us through Facebook, actually, and told us that activist group Frack Free Lancashire should be mentioned as being used as controlled opposition. So let's get into the controlled opposition now. This is very important. Now, we've been reporting on controlled opposition, well, for donkey's years, really. Now, this is a big part of the investigations done over the years by us. It is common knowledge to us that the charlatans who took over the Occupy movement went straight into subverting and controlling the fracking protests. Yes, all of those fake activists from Occupy, the ones who took it over and subverted it, went straight into fracking. And this has been enormously frustrating to the genuine people with a brain cell who contact us, and there are many of them. And basically these people have some powers of observation. And the gullibility of some in these protest groups is astonishing, though, because these same old idiots and fake activists turn up, some of them for about 30 years, I kid you not, have been around this fake activism scene for that long, and nobody cottons on. And there's a good reason for that, because there's a new influx of activists all the time, and the young are very easily malleable because they're very enthusiastic. So these idiots start to enthuse them with their fake activism and basically getting involved in things which will just waste their time, and that's it, game over. Again, but yeah, this happens in a generational way, really. Now, these paid for fake activists, yes, in their costumes, and often ridiculous, get this, dreadlocks. I mean, they still use dreadlocks on these people. It's incredible. And soundbite rhetoric. They always have soundbite rhetoric. It's beyond a joke, but get this, garden gnomes in hippie clothes and dreadlocks. And so they're just so out of date, but as long as their costumes work, why change it now? Which is a very good point. I just made a note of that, you see. So they have these gnomes dressed up with dreadlocks, spouting the sort of propaganda that is so lame and unbelievable that only a 3-year-old would believe it. Well, 3-year-olds are the new activists, aren't they? So they need 3-year-olds to be used. So maybe these fake dreadlock garden gnome people are there just to bring in the new generation, the 3-year-olds. That would make sense, wouldn't it? Yeah, but they've also been hoodwinking older people, which is a bit sad. But Extinction Rebellion, which is the culmination of all this corporate kind of fake activism and the scroungers and genuine simpletons who go along with it, and this army of children, including, of course, the Asperger's child, the Asperger's child abuse victim, actually used by the UN, Greta Thunberg, obviously pushed by her ridiculous showbiz parents who actually have vested interest in pushing the climate change scam. You know, I mean, once you look into all this and look at the links, you can do it in about 10 minutes. So why aren't people getting it? I don't know. But maybe ask them and maybe put them in the way of some actual information. But it's no longer a case of who is controlled opposition, but who isn't controlled opposition. There are a good percentage of our listeners who know what we're talking about here. And for those who don't, please look at the shows that we've done on this. The Puppet Masters of Occupy. There's another one called Inside Occupy and the Bank of Ideas. There's another one called Extinction Rebellion Fake Protest. They're all available on our website at windowsontheworld.net. Now, the sheer stupidity of the latest and indeed only possible outcome of all previous fake protests to be the pantomime stupidity. The pantomime stupidity of Extinction Rebellion actually tops everything. It is the most ridiculous, extreme, cartoon and nonsensical form of non-rebellion. And I actually had to talk to somebody about this the other night who was seriously asking me questions as to why people shouldn't go along with it. And I gave them quite a few reasons. Some of them we've already outlined, but basically anyone who doesn't get this has to be stupid. There is no excuse anymore. But the over-entitled flexing their egos to the detriment of the whole planet is what is happening here, and it's not going to stop as they're training more and more and more of these people every day. But we've got to get on to the point sometime tonight that Britain was never going to leave the EU while it had a fully functioning EU Board of Deputies. Do you like that terminology? Because that's what they are. Brexit will not happen. But what a great way for the majority to find out that their votes mean nothing. Now, this is, of course, or maybe not, of course, to some people, referring to this Bruges Group document, which has been alleged to have been put online, and it basically is a treaty between May and Merkel to keep the UK in the EU, keeping the EU institution intact for 2020 when the Lisbon Treaty comes in. That's what I would read was happening here. But the possible side of this is that the public may become more disenfranchised and get to know that the glove puppets which are being voted for and which people have put their faith in are actually nothing to do with the agenda. Now, that would be really handy if people knew that, wouldn't it? But despite the public, Theresa May and Angela Merkel agreed last summer, it says here, to ensure that irrespective of the Brexit negotiations, the UK will, in inverted commas, rejoin the EU in 2020, just to actually re-emphasise that point. Now, let's get on to more predictable news. Now listen to this. The Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland warns of global economy risks and crisis relapse. I'll just read that again. The Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland warns of global economy risks, crisis, relapse. The global economy risks a crisis and a relapse. Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? Because we've been waiting on this for quite some time, since 2008. So I would say, oh no, not again. Well, we are due for another one. And who better to inform us than the bank which monitors every banking transaction on the planet? Yes, the Bank of International Settlements. Now, this is a quote from Bank of International Settlements chief economist Claudio Boro. Things look rather fragile, he says. He told reporters this in a conference call. He carries on. There is little left in the medicine chest to nurse the patient back to health or care for him in a case of relapse. Nice analogy there. Our regular correspondent and contributor Per in Sweden states that Claudio Boro should be taken heed of, and that Boro was one of a sort of exclusive club that consistently argued that central banks must start stabilising asset prices. Now, that would make sense, wouldn't it? But another prominent voice here is Charles Goodhart, who served on the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England. And he says this is basically what Per says here, because he was actually an economist, our friend Per in Sweden. He says the whole system is doomed, and the reason is that somehow the idiots always make it to the top, forming parasitic coalitions while they rub each other's backs. Now, isn't this familiar about what we've been talking about during this whole show? This is what happens when only a small minority do any work, whilst the rest plot in conference calls on gaining more and more power. Yes, this is also relative to everything in this week's show, whether it's the manufacture of hate by those who are searching everywhere for hate speech, or those feeding off the intelligence services narrative and repeating it for profit. Those idiots we've talked about tonight. The infiltrators and collaborators are short of originality. This is the main point. And they're very big on one-upmanship. So the state devices of subversion appeal directly to them. This is the most important thing. And now the school kids are being taught ridiculous propaganda, which is not even an educated 10-year-old would believe. Yet their idiotic school teachers are actively encouraging. This is such an important point. How come these school teachers are instructing their children to actually believe in anthropological global warming without any argument? Surely this is against the principles of education. Well, we're not talking about education anymore, are we? We're talking about indoctrination. So it's children participating in the propagation of absurdities. Now, after the destruction of Occupy and its initial focus on the monetary system, and how this was taken over, the things we've just been talking about, but it's basically been taken over by the state and these state-funded activists, not activists, activists. The song came into my mind just after all this happened in around 2011, I think, or 2010. I was thinking of the song by The Who, We Won't Get Fooled Again. Now, this was paraded around, actually, on many different sort of alternative media websites at the time as an analogy for what happened with Occupy. And now things have deteriorated to the extent that those who are not fooled are constantly actively attacked and harassed and labelled, again, far-right, anti-Semitic, or even more laughably, neo-Nazis. Now, can we have some new ones, please? Can the intelligence services and the subversives running the country come up with anything more original than those three? I very much doubt it, because they haven't so far. Now, whether terrorist attacks are real or fake no longer matters to the predicted outcomes, as we've been saying in this show. So the attacks themselves are actually now irrelevant, as the agenda will continue with or without the attacks. This is the sort of point I was trying to make with this show, that basically, even though these things are interwoven, they're now not even kind of relevant to each other, because the agenda is moving in such a predictable direction that these things don't really even back it up. They're just, in a way now, a side issue to examine to see if they're real or not. Now, the continuing narrative is now predictable, so predictable and monotonous to anyone who logs the events and propaganda, and played out in the wake of it all, basically, is what's happening. It's just what we're talking about in this show. Now, as a nice coda to the New Zealand shooting, the Crown Corporation of Kiwiland have reminded their citizens they face up to 10 years in prison for knowingly possessing a copy of the New Zealand mosque video, which was actually streamed on YouTube as this guy was apparently shooting people, this Brendan Tarrant. He streamed it live for the first 17 minutes on Facebook, right? So the New Zealand police then tweeted, "We would also like to remind the public that it is an offence to distribute an objectionable publication." Well, that could actually bring us quite nicely to an objectionable publication, which is indeed offensive. And it's a nice way of rounding off the show, because I've got this article which perfectly describes what everybody in the country is actually going through with their local authority, and the fact that we are not given any choice in what is actually happening around us. And of course this ties into the bigger picture, what we've just been talking about here, and it's from a newspaper in Waltham Forest called The Guardian. And it's basically saying that Waltham Forest Council have been making £145,000 profit from an illegal newsletter. Now, there was this propaganda rag which was being produced while I lived in that borough, and it's called the Waltham Forest News. Of course, that's newspeak for propaganda. It's not news. It's basically a load of happy, clappy, smiley faces reinforcing how great the council is and how great everything they do is, and obfuscating anything of any real actual value, and also demonising local businesses. Now, when I got onto them about their named and shamed section, where they were demonising local businessmen or businesswomen for putting out their rubbish on the wrong day, I actually made a big impact, because they took it all down. A bit like when they were demonising members of the public who had been photographed by NSL for allegedly dropping litter as basically the most wanted criminals in the borough. I got that taken down as well, their Grimebusters website. But this Waltham Forest News is an absolute disgrace. And I'll get into this. Maybe you've got one in your local area. Now, this is subversion at its best. In April 2018, the Secretary of State ordered the authority to cease publishing its Waltham Forest News free sheet twice a month. Twice a month they put this crap through people's letterboxes. Now, it says currently the paper is failing to adhere to the Local Audit and Accountability Act 2014, which restricts councils to publishing newsletters just 4 times a year to stop them taking money away from the newspaper industry. So this is what they're doing. It's called controlling the narrative. And Waltham Forest is the most, what could you say, Stasi-like and absolutely subversive local authorities in London. It's one of the worst, and I know I've taken them to court, and guess what? I won. Yeah, but it carries on here anyway. It has now been revealed that the council is spending more than £400,000 in internal advertising costs on the venture, which in effect is money being shuffled from one side of the council to another. Remember, we're talking about one of the most corrupt councils in the country here, Waltham Forest Council, and that's by their own investigations, by the way. It says, but with this income taken into account, council officers revealed the paper and its communications department is making £142,000, 700 per year profit, as council staff described it in a meeting overall. Council staff revealed the figure in a budget scrutiny meeting, saying the money spent on the paper's production would happen away. Whatever that means. This is probably due to the legal obligation to display statutory notices publicly. Oh, that's right. They said it would happen anyway. Sorry about that. So the paper's production would happen anyway. Well, wait a minute, they've already been told that they're not allowed to do it. Such is the logic of the change agent. Let's carry on. Usually statutory notices such as planning decisions, council tax rates and other important council announcements would be placed in local newspapers, and the income generated from those advertisements would support the local newspaper industry. In 2017, the London Assembly's August Economy Committee report said local newspapers have in some cases been negatively affected by local authorities regularly publishing their own newsletters. Now, I don't see how this propaganda crap that comes out of councils has anything to do with news. That's a side issue, but it carries on. While these newsletters have their place, they should not be a substitute for local news. Well, of course they shouldn't, because they're not news. They're just crap propaganda by change agents and sponges in the local council. Basically, these parasites who the public are paying for with, guess what, their council tax. So this was a big thing when I was in that borough, saying, well, the council tax is paying for this rag of propaganda and lies to be put through your letterbox every 2 weeks. They've been told it's not even legal, and they're still doing it. This is what you're up against, you see, with change agents, these people who are controlling the narrative at every level of public opinion. It says the government's intervention to clamp down on how frequently these publications are produced will help local newspapers. Well, not in this case, obviously. Waltham Forest Council is one of only 3 local authorities nationwide that are still refusing to abide by government guidelines on publication frequency. Hackney and Newham are the other 2. What a surprise. They're not corrupt at all, are they, Hackney and Newham? Look into them. In June 2018, in a cabinet meeting, council leader, well, basically useful idiot change agent and complete muppet, Claire Coghill, remained defiant of the government order. Of course she would, because she's on the gravy train. She's a sponging scrounger, and announced the council's plans to take the government to court to fight the case in a judicial review. That judicial review will start on Wednesday, May 22nd, and is expected to last 2 days. A council spokesman said, "We believe Waltham Forest News provides residents with reliable coverage of local news, information and events." You couldn't make this up, could you? But what I would say to people in Waltham Forest is deduct part of your council tax, go to court and have a court case, basically start defying this stuff, get street after street to stop paying your council tax, and then you might get somewhere. But if you're not going to do that, well, put up with it, because you're accepting it. Nobody can be subverted unless they agree. So you've all agreed to it. That's my point. So it says here, it reaches every household in the borough and contains a thorough guide to what is happening in the local area for residents, as well as information on how residents can access services and benefits that the council provides. Well, wait a minute. Isn't it meant to do that on the council website? Wouldn't it all be on there? Why would they be getting all this money for printing a newspaper, which they keep the money for, to tell you what you already should know through the local authority website? Interesting, eh? It carries on. It also fulfills our legal obligations to print public notices. Well, they've already been told that it goes against their legal obligations. It's not legal. They've already been told that. This is the narrative of the change agent. These people will keep lying until they're basically publicly flogged or hung. Now, that's not hate speak, by the way. That's kind of, an analogy. So basically, yeah, it says it also fulfills our legal obligations to print public notices in a fortnightly publication without having to spend taxpayers' money on expensive advertising in the commercial press. You couldn't make it up, but that's what we're up against in the post-truth world. These disgusting reprobates who lie for a living. So, same as the intelligence services, same as the Muppets who were involved in propagating fake narratives of terror these are the same kind of useful idiot drones that are employed in your local authority. So if you want to do anything about it, remember that we do a series of talks called The Bigger Picture, and we do have solutions. We talk about this and about these criminal subversives in local authorities and beyond, and what can be done about them. And what can be done about them is to expose them. In this borough, Waltham Forest, where I used to live, and I compare it to other boroughs because it's obviously the same, but particularly a good example in that you have complete useful idiots put in there who I can identify because I've known them for years. I've seen these people in so-called public office, and what they do is despicable. They are now recruiting children to go against their parents, to have all their roads closed down, to stop people taking their kids to school in cars. They're subverting the children against their parents. That is Stasi, Soviet Union, KGB handbook protocol. And that's what your local council are doing. Doesn't matter really whether, in a way, now we're talking about terrorist attacks or the crap that's coming from your local council. It's all the same in actual fact, because it's there to forward one agenda. Yes, global governance and the Global Action Plan, which is what we talk about week in, week out. And we do talk about the bigger picture. So book our talks, The Bigger Picture, even though we have subversives trying to shut those down. If you put one on in your local area, it will be well attended, like the ones we did up north, where people still have a backbone. If your area still has a backbone, do book us for one of the talks, because it's some very useful information. Now, that's it for this week. I will be back in the UK very soon. I've been broadcasting from not entirely kind of perfect places to broadcast from, but we've got the show out every week for the past couple of months, and we intend to keep doing it well into the future. So thanks for listening. That's it from Windows on the World for this week, and we'll see you next week, same time. Good night, everybody.
Yeah, welcome to Windows on the World, and the concept of how Earth run today. Because today, the way the world run today, they're not running by the law of life. Because the law of life is just one law. But they create their law to go around the law of life.
Join me, Mark Windows, for Windows on the World live every Sunday 9 to 11 p.m. GMT. Check out our archive and program stream at windowsontheworld.net.